The collapse doesn't begin with fire. It begins with light, sunlight that should be golden, suddenly filtered through a permanent haze. The kind that appears when a landscape starts losing its grip on moisture, shade, and cooling capacity. What happens when a modern nation runs out of trees? This isn't hypothetical. America already did this once. By 1920, only 5% of the country's original old-growth forests were still standing. One more generation of logging would have triggered a total system collapse, one that takes centuries to undo. And here's the part nobody sees coming. Forests don't die tree by tree. They die in cascades. Cut the canopy, and the soil dries. Dried soil stops holding water. Without water, seedlings die. And when seedlings die, the land shifts toward desert, sometimes in less than a decade. When a forest system collapses, it doesn't slow down. It accelerates. In this video, we're uncovering the forgotten ecological crash that almost erased America's forests and the silent version of that collapse that's returning today, one forest at a time, in ways most people will never notice until it's too late. Quick question before we begin. How forested is your state right now? More than when you were a kid, or less? In 1880, the U.S. Census Bureau commissioned the first comprehensive forest survey. The results were catastrophic. 2/3 of America's original forests had already been cut. They documented something so alarming that federal officials debated whether to act. But even emergency conservation laws couldn't slow the cutting fast enough. America wasn't losing forests. It was erasing them. Rivers so choked with sediment they changed color. Some are spiked hotter. Winds that once broke against forest walls now ripped straight across cleared land, drying everything faster. Landscapes were shifting in ways that would take decades to understand. Logging towns moved like traveling factories, settle, cut everything to the horizon, abandon the ruins, and move on. Look at Psyche, Michigan. In 1890, it was a booming city of sawmills and 3,000 residents. 10 years later, the logs were gone, the land bare, and the town became nothing but a handful of foundations. A ghost town left behind by the forests themselves. Michigan alone lost 160 billion board feet of white pine in just 40 years, enough to build 10 million homes. This crisis became undeniable when Forest Survey data arrived. By 1909, the fear was so widespread that the Chicago Tribune ran a front-page headline, not about war or politics, but timber famine threatens nation. The pattern modern ecologists call a runaway landscape shift was already visible. Once the canopy vanished, summers in Michigan's Upper Peninsula rose 5 degrees Fahrenheit between 1890 and 1910, and the Tequamanon River, which had flowed year-round for millennia, dried to a trickle each summer. Drought zones expanded across the upper Midwest, riverbanks collapsed along tributaries of the Mississippi, and dust storms struck Michigan and Wisconsin, decades before the Dust Bowl. Most Americans had no idea. The collapse happened unevenly, state by state, forest by forest, and without satellite images, national media coverage, or ecological science to explain it, the danger remained invisible. The warning signs were already there. Dust storms, collapsing rivers, heat waves in formerly cool regions. But without understanding forests as climate machines, Americans couldn't see they were dismantling the infrastructure that kept the continent livable. Before we go deeper, do you live near a known ghost town, or know of one in your state? If so, drop its name in the comments, because it was likely the forest that disappeared first, not the people. Beneath every footstep on a forest floor lies something invisible, a massive underground network of fungi, stretching across acres, kilometers, entire ecosystems. Ecologists call it the mycorrhizal network, but it's better thought of as the forest internet. These fungal webs transfer nutrients between trees, send chemical warnings about pests, and regulate water distribution. Cut the trees, and the network collapses within months. This is why replanting alone isn't enough. Plant new saplings on cleared land, and they often fail. The soil has lost its fungal structure, the moisture cycles are broken, and the shade that once cooled the forest floor is gone. A forest isn't a collection of trees. It's a machine made of thousands of interconnected parts with a single power switch. Clear cutting flips it off. The feedback loops are brutal. Without canopy cover, summer temperatures rise. Trees stop pumping moisture into the air. Soil dries. Seedlings die. Without new growth, erosion accelerates, and streams that once ran year-round vanish. In Michigan's Upper Peninsula, after logging peaked in the 1890s, summer temperatures climbed 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Rivers like the Tequamanon dwindled, and dust storms became common. A cascade that erased centuries of growth in a single decade. Fragmentation makes the collapse even worse. When forests are broken into isolated patches, the mycorrhizal networks can't bridge the gaps. Each fragment becomes its own failing system, unable to share resources or warnings. The forest internet goes dark. By understanding forests as machines and mycorrhizal networks as their nervous system, we can see why historical collapse happened so quickly and why modern threats, hidden beneath the surface, could trigger the next silent crisis. Do you live near a forest? And can you name it? If yes, drop the name below. The U.S. is losing forests faster today than at any point since the 1920s. In 2024 alone, the country lost 1.5 million hectares of natural forest, and net forest growth is now negative for the first time in decades. Small patches are chopped for housing, roads, or industrial logging, fragmenting once contiguous forests into isolated biological islands. These fragments aren't just smaller, they're ecologically compromised. A wood thrush, which needs 250 acres of unbroken forest to nest, cannot survive in a 50-acre patch surrounded by highways and subdivisions. The patch looks green from above, but it's functionally empty. Here's where it gets worse. The data itself is misleading. Governments report that tree cover is stable or even increasing. But these statistics include city parks, Christmas tree farms, and monoculture pine plantations. Cut down an ancient forest, replace it with rows of fast-growing pines, and satellites detect no change. In effect, the U.S. technically has more tree cover than in 1950, but a significant portion consists of monoculture plantations that lack biodiversity, provide minimal wildlife habitat, and fail to sustain resilient ecosystems. The wood pellet industry worsens the crisis. Forests in North Carolina's Piedmont and Georgia's coastal plains are harvested on a massive scale. Entire stands of hardwoods clear-cut, chipped, and shipped to Europe as green energy. The Southeast now produces over 7 million tons of wood pellets annually, roughly 2,000 acres of forest converted every day. Private land ownership compounds the problem. Over 60% of U.S. forests sit on private property, where federal protections rarely apply. A landowner can clear-cut 200 acres of old-growth forest, and in most states, no permit is required. Wood pellet mills know this, targeting private land aggressively, offering cash for timber rights, converting biodiverse forests into industrial feedstock within months. Climate feedback loops amplify these losses. In the Southeast, deforested areas now experience summer temperatures 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit higher than nearby forested land. Cleared land absorbs more heat, dries soils, and accelerates dieback of remaining forests. Streams shrink, dust rises, and storms intensify, a silent cascade that mirrors the 19th century collapse, but in modern dress. Think back 20 years, your state, more or less forested. If you've seen a forest disappear, name the place below. If you're not sure, look it up and tell us what you find. Forests are survival infrastructure. They do more than stand tall. They move water across the continent, keep cities livable, and ensure the food on our tables actually grows. Take them away, and the consequences hit everyone, whether you live next to a forest or hundreds of miles away. In Arizona, the loss of ponderosa pine forests around Flagstaff has already made summers 6 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit hotter. Rivers that once fed the Colorado tributaries shrink, soil dries, and the air holds less moisture. The same physics that drives the Amazon's rainfall conveyor now works closer to home. Deforested regions downwind receive less rain, and counties across the western central U.S. are seeing more frequent moderate drought years. Crops fail, wells run low, and the water bills in cities thousands of miles from the nearest forest start to climb. The consequences aren't just physical. Walk down a city street without shade or green space, and you'll feel it. Temperatures soar, concrete reflects heat, and the nervous system absorbs it all. People living on tree-lined streets report fewer prescriptions for antidepressants than those in bare neighborhoods. Remove forests from the equation, and cities get hotter, noisier, and more hostile to human health. Anxiety rises, aggression surfaces, and even social cohesion frays. Trees silently guard against this, but only when they exist. Economic and ecological shocks ripple outward. The loss of pollinators, seed-dispersing birds, and soil microbe networks reduces farm yields, pushing up food prices. Rural communities relying on forestry, agriculture, or ecosystem services may see entire towns abandoned, while insurance rates spike for homeowners exposed to runaway wildfires or flash floods. One small species gone can trigger a chain reaction. Fewer seeds, fewer trees, fewer fruits, fewer crops, fewer jobs. The grocery store shelves suddenly feel less secure, and the consequences are immediate. Imagine this personally. No shade on your walk to work, water restrictions every summer, or food prices that spike because forests far away can't perform their invisible duties. Think of a forest near you. How would your life change if it disappeared tomorrow? Drop the place and the consequence you can imagine in the comments. Make it concrete, make it real. Forests are more than scenery. They are climate regulators, water conveyors, psychological buffers, and economic stabilizers. Losing them isn't abstract. It's a chain of cascading costs you can see, feel, and increasingly live through. The stakes are clear. Forests are failing, water is vanishing, cities are heating, and wildlife is disappearing. But collapse isn't inevitable. Across the country, strategies are emerging that rebuild connectivity, restore ecosystems, and buy time against climate spirals. One of the most powerful tools is corridors and connected landscapes. Fragmented forests starve underground networks of water, nutrients, and mycorrhizal communication. Reconnect them, and life surges back. IMG-SARC equals wildlife diagram, alt equals wildlife corridor diagram. Think of it as a nervous system for the forest. Reconnect the nodes, and the signals flow again. In the southeast, linking isolated hardwood patches allows wood thrushes and other sensitive species to recolonize, while fungal networks resume their silent work of soil regeneration. Rewilding degraded areas is another promising approach. In Pennsylvania, abandoned farmland is being converted back to forest, seeded with native trees, shrubs, and understory plants. Over a decade, these rewilded sites captured 20% more carbon and supported 3 times more pollinator species than adjacent farmland. Streams stabilize, soil regenerates, and habitat returns. Fire-resistant forests and adaptive management add resilience. In Arizona and New Mexico, land managers selectively thin overgrown ponderosa stands and plant drought-tolerant varieties. These treatments have reduced wildfire intensity by 40 to 60% while preserving 80% of canopy cover and the water cycles downstream. When storms come, these forests hold soil in place, buffer floods, and cool the air. Private landowners are a critical piece of the puzzle. Programs that incentivize sustainable logging or compensate for conservation easements can flip economic incentives. In North Carolina's Piedmont, some timber companies now partner with conservation groups, leaving key habitat corridors intact while still harvesting commercially viable trees elsewhere. Collapse loops slow when people see both ecological and economic benefit. At a broader scale, policy, technology, and citizen engagement amplify results. Satellite monitoring, AI-driven restoration mapping, and grassroots tree planting initiatives allow interventions to be precise, timely, and measurable. Forests aren't static monuments. They are living systems that can self-organize when stressors are managed, corridors restored, and communities engaged. Imagine a future where your local forest isn't just surviving, it's thriving. Streams run full, shade cools your street, pollinators hum across farms, and wildlife returns. Each tree planted, corridor restored, or drought-tolerant species introduced is a step away from collapse. Name one green space near you: park, grove, forest edge. What's one small action that could make it more resilient? Drop both below. Forests don't vanish with a roar. They disappear quietly, acre by acre. Their collapse touches the water in our taps, the air in our cities, the shade on our streets, and the food on our tables. Every forest holds more than just trees. It contains 10,000 years of climate data in its soil, pollen layers, charcoal records, carbon archives. These natural libraries show how ecosystems survived ice ages, droughts, and fires. When a forest is cleared, we don't just lose future resilience, we erase the past. The instruction manual for survival disappears with the trees. But the story can change. Across the country, people are reconnecting fragmented forests, rewilding abandoned land, and proving ecosystems can heal when stressors are removed. Each corridor restored, each fire-adapted forest preserved, each conservation-minded landowner. These aren't just environmental wins. They're investments in the water we drink, the air we breathe, and the stability of our communities. The story isn't over, but the window is closing. Forests are still disappearing, quietly, one patch at a time, but unlike in the 1880s, we now understand what's at stake. The question isn't whether collapse can happen, it's whether we choose to see it coming. Because collapse isn't an explosion, it's a silence. And if we aren't paying attention, America's forests will fade before we realize they're gone. If you want to understand the next chapter of this crisis, and how the hidden battle over America's rivers is linked to its forests, subscribe so you don't miss it. Think of one green space, a forest, park, street with trees, or creek. Imagine it thriving. Full canopy, clean water, wildlife returning. What would change in your life? Your air quality? Your summer temperature? Your mental space? Name the place and the difference below.